Why have religions failed to provide wisdom and also failed to provide any sort of spiritual comfort to people throughout the ages? I'm referring specifically to the Abrahamic religions. Well, just like any other teaching, unfortunately, if something is taught or assimilated by ignorance, it will become yet another cog in the misery machine. Yes? It will become a new set of softwares, let's say, for the machine that misery is. Because once something happens, it is birthed out of misery, obviously it will become nothing else but an engine of propagating misery itself. When we look, for example, let's look at the Chinese and Japanese. Yes, these two civilizations have lived under an influence called Confucianism. Confucianism, for 1,000 years, influenced their style and is still prevalent till today. Maybe it is not practiced as much, but when something is as lengthy as that, it is still carried on at a karmic level. People may no longer necessarily learn that, but just like a certain regime exists for, let's say, 100 years, if that regime falls, sufficient generations were birthed into it. So even a few other generations will think somewhat like that without learning about that or without any more behaving within that system. Yes? Let's say 2 or 3 generations are birthed after the fall of that influence, right? Of that regime. Some of the influences of those regimes will be still prevalent in them, right? So, with Confucianism, maybe it is still prevalent till today, but unfortunately, it was also assimilated by misery. One of the principles of Confucianism said that you, as a citizen, had to do everything possible to make your superior's life better so that they, in return, can make your life better. Or, well, maybe it's not the exact words, but it's something there along the lines. Now, the blind spot of this is, well, what do you do when your superiors simply don't care about you, right? You end up thinking that, well, it's a must, right? The more you lose faith into something that's been, guiding you more or less at your current level of awareness, when you're ready to step out, what will happen? Hmm? You will try to enforce it. You will try to reinforce it afterwards. You will say it must be done, right? Everyone before you has done so, and you must also carry on the tradition, right? Then you're probably gonna think towards honor and the such. You're gonna dishonor your ancestors, right? If you don't do that. Well, I'm not sure if your ancestors will necessarily care much, especially if they have long since departed, because, well, whoever has departed, you can no longer influence them emotionally, necessarily through your behavior. You can do certain spiritual practices, yes, to influence some of them, but that is based on some cords that you have towards them. And, well, it goes a bit more than that, but when it comes to disappointing them. See, they no longer have a physical body, and their entire business with this world is done. Maybe they have reincarnated themselves, but most likely they are born elsewhere. They have other parents, they have another part probably of their karma influencing them. They will most likely not remember who you are, and it will be very weird to go to them and say, hey, before you were born, you lived this life and you were 200 years ago my, grandfather, right? It's like, it doesn't look too good to go to a child or to an adolescent and tell them that, right? The police might take you and they might think you are some, person with psychiatric needs. So, if we are to move even further from this, when even enforcing of that fails, well, everyone lose faith and they just have a blind direction. When even enforcing a certain idea fails, well, you will simply fail at doing anything else. When something that you thought it is critical to your existence no longer provides any joy or doesn't provide any sense of direction or, well, any logicality at all, you will simply follow it for a lack of anything else, right? You will follow that blindly. The whole society will function most likely blindly. They won't necessarily have any direction. And everyone must do something, and they will do certain things, still clinging to the old ideas, right? Maybe these two peoples were ready to transcend those after a while, but well, maybe they were, maybe they weren't. Whatever happened, they still are affected more or less by this. This goes into more and more disappointment in current society. And in order to create a sense in your life, you will have to create things even more complex, more uselessly intricate, so that you create a certain sense of belonging, so that you create a certain sense of stability, of knowledge. And when you look at Chinese and Japanese, right, even their language, their corresponding language, is sufficiently intricate enough for them, let alone for new beginners. When we look around in Asia, well, you also see that a similar pattern also existed within the Arabic people. Yes, their language is also convoluted as heck. Then you have a quite striking, well, factor, right? When you look at them, you see in the East, well, throughout their history, they have had quite thriving societies, if we look at it, right? Well, probably the world still hates them for their 300-ish years of slavery and butchering Africa's, culture with their slavery, black slavery, white slavery, and whatever not. But when we look at things, there have been a lot of wise people, and if we also look at things, they have brought mathematics. Maybe according to a story, they took it from the Indians and whatever not, but it doesn't mean that, they still haven't spread it to the whole world. When you look at music, for example, the Arabic music accords are still considered to be the best sounding in the world, and also are a bit more complex in a way because they use certain sounds that other parts of the world don't employ. Now, when you look at them, though they had quite flourishing societies, a flourishing, rich society doesn't mean people are necessarily leading a good life. This leads to yet another problem in ignorance because, well, when you see that there is so much choice, so much potential, and you're not having literally anything in life, your life isn't in any way, shape, or form better, it creates another kind of hatred towards that society. You can see the same thing happening nowadays in many parts of the world. Many parts of the so-called countries that are, first world countries or the richest of the countries, when you look at them, it is the country that has a good economy, but the people don't necessarily have good salaries or necessarily a good lifestyle. Maybe they earn much better than people in poorer countries. But when you look at the things, people still uh, you know, are not having a good life. Mainly because having good money and a good way of life for a certain period of time builds up complacency, right? When people become complacent, they become even more ignorant. When ignorance becomes strong enough, there will also start to be an increasing amount of prosophobia or a fear of change, a fear of progress, right? So there will always be tensions in between generations. Even if people earn well, the newer generations will always be bullied by the older generations that they must do the same thing that the older generations did, which will be in contrast with the newer generations who want something new. These things are prevalent everywhere, but in poorer countries are less prevalent because being less developed, there is not much they can cling to. When you look at countries that have so much technology, you will see so many people fighting that every new generation will simply be versed in the new technologies and will instantly assimilate all the information regarding them, or a lot of information, while the older generations will seek to simply live in the background and keep imagining how the older life was, right? On life on their own time was. And maybe you will see them imagining all sorts of things like how much they would walk into nature and this and that. But it doesn't matter how much technology your society has, you can still go into nature anyways, right? You don't have to be a slave of your mobile phone, you don't have to be a slave of watching your computer screen or your mobile phone screen or your television screen 24/7, right? So the point is very simple. In life, even religions were embraced by the idea of ignorance. Yes, when you look, for example, at the Abrahamic religions, one of their downfalls is the fact that everything you do doesn't matter, right? Because God has ultimate control over you. This is technically a narcissistic standpoint, or the standpoint of anyone who simply has such a low esteem. Everything they do, maybe they do it perfectly, but still it doesn't matter because, well, whatever they do, it doesn't matter. They will simply end up in a situation. So, people who have such a low esteem end up in a situation where everything they do, everything that they perform, is simply somehow transposed upon a greater force. They will say, no, 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 it was not them, it was divinity, creation, gods, whatever they call, that which they believe in, right? When people have such a low esteem, well, everything that they do is never their merit, right? Especially if you've been born in narcissistic environments, whatever you succeed is never yours, right? It is something else. You are just lucky. All the belittling possible. No, you were the one who actually did it. Yes, maybe you had some favorable outcomes and events that, uh, some events that favored you, more or less, but in the end, you were the one who did at least most of the effort, right? Even a bit of your effort, but you're still victorious, right? You succeeded in that, so there's no need to belittle it. Yes, the result is still the same whether you belittle yourself or not. Whether you boast about it, the result is still the same. Now, when it comes to this, this will be the downfall of religions. You see it in Catholicism, for example, which was very brutal on the idea that whatever you do doesn't matter, God has full control over you. It is, in a way, a downfall of Islam as well, because when you combine this idea with the idea of the definition itself of Islam, which I heard means ultimate submission, creates a very great confusion, a very great, how to put it, contrast. Because why am I supposed to be such a slave of God, more or less, and do so much in the name of God if, you know, because of one's low self esteem, they will think everything I do doesn't matter, that God, anyways, decides everything I do. Why am I supposed to do everything for God? Right? Don't forget, when people are in low esteem, their religion doesn't matter. They will be just 1,000 times more confused. When you are that much confused, logic simply can't exist much because, when you are 1,000 times more confused due to low esteem, everything kind of ends up making sense, right? You live in a Delulu world. That is why you see so many people nowadays embracing all sorts of crazy ideas that they are whatever they wish they be. You see people identifying with robots. You see people identifying as bunnies. You see people identify as whatever the fuck they want, right? Why? Because of low esteem. And, well, when you are 1,000 times more confused, obviously, you will simply tend to be, you will be very prone to embracing this Delulu world as, your only possible truth, right? Because when everything is confusing, which is the truth in the end, right? You have to experience that world for sufficient enough that all those ideas suddenly break. You will feel more alone than ever, well, maybe last even years, and slowly and surely you will start getting some sense of self and doing things, belonging to something, and slowly and surely build let's say, a certain structure which will pull you back on the right track. This typically is a very great effort, and a lot of people unfortunately commit to self-destructive behaviors or even self-destruction because ultimate confusion is something most minds cannot bear. Yes? If you are capable of transcending the idea of meaning, confusion is not something to be used against you, because if meaning is irrelevant to you, anyways, things, whether they make sense or not, it kind of doesn't matter. You lean more onto the idea of intuition rather than logics of the mind, because intuition is a higher logics that bypasses certain steps of the logical mind and uses more variables than the logical mind will make use of. Yes? That is why intuitive people typically don't make much sense to the intellectual people, right? Intellectual people are people who gather a lot of information and make use of that information as variables for the mind, which result in them taking decisions based on whatever they have accumulated in the mind. When you have religions being embraced by such people, you kind of end up with what philosophy called the empiricists, right? Empiricists are the kind of people who simply cannot accept that which is beyond their mind, but not the mind itself as a whole, but more like their own perception. So you have ideas like God does not exist because I cannot perceive them. In a way, this is kind of stupid because, well, let's say you cannot see God, but similarly, you see the idea of God. Yes. If we think about Abrahamic religions, yes, each of the three says, well, you may not see God, but you see the end result of God, which is creation technically and everything that you see around. Yes, everything you touch, everything you breathe, everything you feel. Yes, even spirituality itself, Hinduism and other spiritual practices tell you even the air that you breathe is creation. So, in one sense, one may say that the Abrahamic religions are kind of true. At the same time, let's say you can't simply base yourself on only your senses and, live a good life because you're going to be 100 times more confused through empiricism because empiricism says if my senses can't perceive it, it can't exist. Well, let's look in space. See, no one has ever seen a black hole. Yes? You can look with your telescopes as much advanced as they are. You will never see a black hole. Yes? What do you see is not a black hole. What you see is the result of a black hole. Because what people don't know, and a lot of people are kind of silly, a black hole is technically nothing. Yes? It is a nothingness. And whatever you see is the effect of that nothingness. Yes? Because imagine a bubble of nothing. Yes? Which sounds very ironical to the logical mind because bubble means a space and then nothingness means a lack of space. Yes, there is technically no space, there is technically no time. If there is no space, there is a certain time, yes, because there is a certain layer of time that goes beyond physicality as we know it. But there, within a black hole, there is no space. But scientists, through whatever quirks of mathematics, they believe somewhere there, in the exact center of that nothingness, there is something called the singularity. Whether that exists or not, I assure you are not going to reach that anytime soon. And secondarily, how can there be a geographical location within something that doesn't exist? Yes, maybe the whole black hole is a singularity, whatever way you call it. Because singularity is a term is a meaning, and this piece of meaning, well, you can shape it in any way, shape, or form, right? A certain word, if you cannot comprehend it, it can mean 100 possible things. And to people who go beyond a certain level of madness, it will mean 100 types of things. Because there are people mad enough in this world who simply second guess their gender, their orientation in life, and not only sexual orientation, but all sorts of things. And because of low esteem, they will end up in all sorts of quirky situations in life. And, well, everything must be taken as a lesson, yes? The unfortunate thing is, if those people end up doing harm to society, well, that is when some things have to be done. Yes, not necessarily brutal things, but when people, start hurting society, that is kind of when some actions have to be taken against those people, one way or another. Now, when we look about all the religions, the problem with them is they most likely have not been birthed in misery, but they have been embraced by misery. They have been assimilated by misery. So they became a new cog, a new set of softwares for the misery machine that exists. Yes? Because look in Asia. Yes? Everything that is there is the most tense of the continents, the most fucked up of the continents, with so many people hating their societies but still clinging desperately to the old ways, as if there is no return, as if there would be no change, no possible change, right? You see people still living or clinging to the ways of the past, although they are almost fully embracing the cyber. You see people, they are so technologized. The more technologized the society becomes, the less people will socialize, the more obsessed they become with their loneliness. At the same time, it becomes a contrast with the fact that they want to socialize. And in the end, these two will make such a violent contrast that they will feel their life makes no sense, right? It is a very weird thing. In all this misery and discomfort, religion will not provide any comfort, unfortunately, because when you are confused as fuck, someone telling you that there is one single God and they have to be male necessarily and they have full control over your life, you are confused as fuck. What kind of sense does this kind of religion make to you, anyways, right? You call something like this to someone who has lived 30 years of misery and confusion, and they're also deeply entrenched, unfortunately, into the karmic confusion of their ancestors, and you're telling them that a God will provide them salvation. They will either become obsessed with that and they will become sooner or later fanatics into that, or they will simply become even more confused. Yes. And nowadays, in times, you will either give birth to someone who will be what I call an individual fanatic, a collective fanatic, or someone who becomes an atheist, right? Or someone who denies that faith, right? That belief necessarily. Let's not necessarily talk about a religion, but a certain belief. Yes? You'll either create an individual fanatic, someone who will, let's say, fight and support that one, but will not necessarily join groups and cause harm. They will probably quarrel with others, but they will still handle their own points. You may create what I call collective fanatics. These people are the ones who join groups and most likely may even become paramilitary or even worse, political groups that start causing movements and the such. And destabilization, they might end up with great entitlements, like probably you may see, well, Zionists most likely, and, well, probably even others, like evangelicals. You can see a lot of such movements, debilitated by madness within Europe, yes, with the Muslim invaders. Or, well, more like they call themselves Muslims, because Islam has a huge amount of problems with the societies it has gone through, because similar to Christianity, it was assimilated into misery. So obviously people made a big piss out of it, yes? People made a very big fuss out of it. Around me, I see a lot of people, claiming that their own God, right? Well, they say God doesn't punish them. But clearly, someone who says that, has a very low esteem in a way, has a very low perception and awareness of the world, and most likely they ended up creating some kind of narcissistic version of God. Obviously, Muslims won't be much different. They obviously have their own kind. And when you look at many countries in the world, there are quite some problems here and there, right? Because while their religion also says, don't kill your own peers, well, you can look at their history and you see many Muslim countries fought one another violently. And for example, in Vietnam, you have people calling themselves the defenders of Islam, but, well, you know, or other countries, not necessarily Vietnam. I don't think I spoke the right country or something, but if you look in Africa, there's a lot of troubles, and people made a big misery out of Islam. When you look in Europe, well, Catholicism is on the dying verge, not necessarily because of the Muslim invaders, but because people kind of woke up and realized that, still clinging to the old ways is not going to make you in any way, shape, or form better. The more you cling to the older ways, you're going to create a very big something, I don't know how to call it, a very big contrast with the evolving world. The world will keep evolving and will not have time for the old ways. If you think about it from a certain standpoint, you will think that it will force you to give up your old ways. Yet again, it will be training people into fighting the generational wars. When people embrace technology, no one will teach them because the older generations will be too busy to bug the new generations with how things were back in the times. The newer generations will want to escape from that, and technology might end up as a good distraction. Yes? Because when everything seems against you in this narcissistic society, distractions are a must, right? Distractions will call misery, misery will amplify, and whatever is stimulated by that misery will obviously become a bigger engine of that misery, right? Hopefully this video raised a bit of awareness. Take care, enjoy life, and this being said, Ferenc Board signing out.